I've always felt like the past never really closes. It just gets tucked away, like a quiet shelf in a giant library, waiting for someone brave enough to look. My name is the investigator, and today I was standing over a small, yellowed slip of paper that had been sitting inside a heavy cedar chest for nearly 50 years. It wasn't a treasure map, but somehow it felt even more valuable. It was a note from my grandmother, written in her careful, steady handwriting, even after all these years. All it had was a name and a strange mix of letters and numbers. To anyone else, it looked like nonsense. But to me, it felt like a door back to a world I thought was gone forever, and I had no idea what was waiting on the other side. My grandmother wasn't the kind of woman who liked technology. She loved front porches, not glowing screens. She barely used the phone, let alone a computer. So why would she hide an old email address in her most private box of memories? What did she know that I didn't? And why did it feel like she was still trying to tell me something, even now? We like to think that time and distance are what break friendships apart. People move away. Life gets busy. Years pass. And slowly, the people who once sat at our tables and shared our secrets fade into stories we barely tell anymore. Walter knew that feeling all too well. For 48 years, he carried the memory of a boy named Kazuhiko, a Japanese exchange student who had lived with his family in the summer of 1976. That summer was filled with laughter, music, and the soft smell of green tea drifting through their home. For a while, they were more than friends. They were brothers. They dreamed together, ate together, and imagined what their lives might become. But when the summer ended, real life took over. Letters slowly stopped. And eventually, there was nothing but silence. After nearly half a century, could that kind of bond still be alive? Could one small, handwritten note from a grandmother really spark something that big? And if it could change the world, what could it do for the one person Walter still hadn't forgiven? It all came back on a quiet Tuesday. Just a normal day, meant for cleaning and sorting through old things. Walter was in his late grandmother's attic, surrounded by the smell of old wood and forgotten years, when he found the chest. Inside were quilts, faded photos, and pieces of a past he barely remembered. And then he saw a small note, written on the back of a grocery receipt. An email address. Years later, when email became common, Kazuhiko had sent her his digital address, and she carefully copied it down, never knowing when Walter might need it. Below it, his grandmother had written a simple message, for Walter in case he ever wants to find his brother again. She had never forgotten what those two boys meant to each other. For decades, she had quietly protected that tiny bridge between them, just waiting for the right moment. Now, sitting at his computer that night, Walter's hands were shaking. His fingers hovered over the keys. If he sent this message, would anyone still be there to read it? Or was he about to speak into silence? Walter sat in the dark for hours, the soft white glow of the computer lighting up his face. What do you even say to someone after 50 years of silence? Hello, do you remember me? Felt too small. I miss you felt too heavy. He hadn't seen Kazuhiko since the days of Jimmy Carter, and now he wondered if his old friend was even still alive, or worse, if he had forgotten him. The fear of being forgotten hits hard, even when you're 70 and think you've seen everything. Walter almost shut the laptop and tucked the note back into the box, letting that memory stay locked away in the attic. But then he thought of his grandmother's gentle smile and her deep belief that kindness never truly fades. So he typed a short, honest message, took a slow breath, and pressed send. A cold chill ran through him as the screen confirmed it was gone. Had he just opened the door to something beautiful, or to a heartbreak he wasn't ready for? As he waited, Walter started reading about Kazuhiko's world. He wanted to understand the bridge they had built all those years ago. He learned how student exchange programs between the US and Japan began right after World War II, created to heal wounds through simple human connection. That fact stayed with him. Their friendship wasn't just a lucky summer. It was part of something much bigger, something meant to bring people together across the world. He pictured Kazuhiko in 1976, young and brave, stepping into a strange country with nothing but a suitcase and hope in his heart. Walter realized he hadn't just hosted a student, he had been part of a quiet act of peace that started in his own backyard. It made him proud, but he couldn't help wondering if that old kind of magic could still survive in today's fast, distant world. 3 long days crawled by. Walter checked his inbox every hour, his heart sinking each time it said, "No new mail." He started to feel silly, like a kid waiting for a letter that would never come. Maybe the email account was gone forever, lost to time. But on the 4th morning, just as sunlight slipped through the trees, a new message appeared. The name on the screen made his breath stop, Kazuhiko. His hands shook as he clicked it open. The email was long, full of broken English, excited exclamation points, and pure emotion. Kazuhiko had never forgotten. He still remembered the family in North Carolina, and he still kept the old baseball Walter had given him, sitting on a shelf in his Tokyo office. Then Walter reached the last line, and everything changed. "I will come to see you, or you come to Japan. Anywhere just to meet again." Walter didn't stop to think. He didn't count the miles or worry about the money. He just booked the flight. A man who hadn't traveled farther than the next state in 10 years was suddenly flying all the way to Japan. And as the plane crossed the Pacific, it felt less like a trip and more like a jump through time. He stared out the small window, thinking about 2 versions of their lives, the skinny, loud boys of 1976 and the quiet, gray-haired men of 2024. He couldn't help wondering what all those years had done to them. Would they still see that same spark in each other's eyes, hidden behind wrinkles and glasses? By the time the plane landed in Narita, the distance hit him hard. He was so far from the red dirt roads and porch swings of his childhood. Standing in the middle of that huge, crowded airport, he suddenly realized something that shook him. He had no idea what Kazuhiko looked like now. And if he didn't know that, how was he supposed to find him in a sea of strangers? Walter moved slowly toward their meeting spot, a tall clock tower in the heart of the city. On the plane, he had read an interesting fact. Did you know that more than 37 million people live in the greater Tokyo area? 37 million. Trying to find one person here felt like trying to pick out one grain of sand on an endless beach. The city was loud, bright, and always moving. Steel, glass, neon everywhere. It was nothing like the quiet summers and fireflies back home in North Carolina. Walter felt small, almost invisible, holding his bag like it was the only thing keeping him steady. He fixed his glasses, smoothed his shirt, and looked up at the clock. The time had come. Every second felt heavier than the last. And as it ticked closer, one thought wouldn't leave him. Would the man waiting be the friend he loved, or a stranger with the same name? Then he saw him. Right there, near a concrete pillar, standing still in the middle of the rushing crowd, was an elderly man holding a small, faded North Carolina flag. He wore a dark suit and a wide, nervous smile. Their eyes met, and in that one quiet moment, 48 years disappeared. It wasn't the gray hair or the wrinkles that told Walter it was him. It was the way Kazuhiko tilted his head when he smiled, just like he did as a boy. Walter dropped his bag and walked toward him, tears filling his eyes. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They wrapped their arms around each other in a long, tight hug that said everything every lost letter and missed birthday never could. Around them, Tokyo kept rushing by. But for those 2 men, the world had stopped. And somehow, after 50 years apart, that hug felt more like home than anything else ever could. They finally slipped into a small, quiet cafe hidden down a side alley, far from the noise of the city. And there, what started as a few minutes of talking slowly turned into an entire afternoon. They talked about everything: their wives, their kids, their careers, the wins and the losses that had shaped them. Kazuhiko shared, with real emotion, how that one summer in North Carolina gave him the confidence to build his own business in a tough world. And Walter talked about his grandmother, the quiet guardian who had kept that old email address safe all those years. They even laughed until they were wiping tears from their eyes, remembering the time they tried to fry chicken in Kazuhiko's tiny dorm room and nearly set off the town's fire alarms. Little by little, all the empty years between them began to fill with shared memories again. But as the sun dipped behind Tokyo's skyline and long shadows crossed their table, something heavy flickered in Walter's eyes, because one question wouldn't let go. Walter finally said what had been sitting in his heart all this time. "I should have looked for you years ago," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I let life get too loud. I just assumed you'd moved on. Kazuhiko reached across the table and held his hand. He admitted he had felt the same guilt, starting letters and emails over and over, but never finding the courage to send them. He was always afraid Walter no longer needed him, or that he no longer fit into his life. And in that moment, they both realized something heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. They hadn't lost each other because they stopped caring. They lost each other because they both thought they didn't matter anymore. Two people standing on opposite sides of a river, both waiting for a sign that never came until a grandmother quietly sent one. And that made them wonder, is it really ever too late to break a silence like this? But the weight of regret didn't last because the joy of being together again was too strong. For the next 3 days, they explored Tokyo side by side. Walter saw temples and glowing city streets through Kazuhiko's proud eyes, while Kazuhiko saw his own home through Walter's childlike wonder. They wandered through quiet shrines and crowded markets, but the moments that mattered most were the quiet ones. Sitting on park benches, watching the world pass, knowing they weren't alone in their memories anymore. Before they parted, they made a promise, no more long silences. This time, they would use every bit of modern tech to stay close, week after week. The bridge between North Carolina and Tokyo was rebuilt, stronger than ever. And as Walter headed for the airport, he felt lighter than he had in years, still wondering just how powerful a friendship can be when it finally finds its way back home. Before Walter got on his long flight back to the hills of North Carolina, Kazuhiko handed him a small, neatly wrapped gift. Inside was a brand new baseball, bright white, still smelling like fresh leather. Both of them had signed it, with the date written right there in ink. For the next 48 years, Kazuhiko said, smiling with a playful wink. And in that quiet moment, you could feel how much it really meant. Not long after, their story found its way online, shared by a family member. And somehow it spread. It went viral, touching millions of people around the world. In a time that often feels angry and divided, one simple image stood out, two elderly men from opposite sides of the planet hugging in a crowded train station. It reminded everyone that, deep down, we're all still human. Soon, people everywhere started sharing their own stories. Lost friends, forgotten teachers, old notes they were suddenly inspired to go look for. And it made you wonder, could one small, handwritten note from a grandmother really spark something that big? As an investigator, when I look at that photo of the note from the attic, I do not see it the same way anymore. It is not just an old email address or a scrap of paper. It is proof that as long as someone out there remembers your name, you are never really gone. But if a simple note can keep a person alive for 50 years, what other secrets are still hiding in the boxes we choose to leave closed? Walter went back to his quiet hills. Kazuhiko stayed in his busy city. But the Pacific Ocean between them doesn't feel like a wall anymore. It feels like a path that's been walked many times. We spend so much of our lives rushing forward, worrying about the next bill, the next problem, the next thing to fix, that we forget to look back. We forget the people who helped shape us, the hands that held ours when we were scared and unsure. So if you found an old, yellow note in a box today, would you be brave enough to reach out and see what happens? The work of finding lost connections is never really done, because the human heart is full of places we haven't seen yet. But this time, one big mystery was solved. Friendship doesn't die just because we stop talking. It just falls asleep, waiting for someone brave enough to wake it up. Walter and Kazuhiko are living proof that time can't break a real bond. So as you go through your busy day, maybe take a quiet moment to look through your own attic. There might be a name waiting there. A voice you haven't heard in years. All it needs is a simple, honest hello. Because in the end, we're not remembered for what we own or what we earn, but for the people we choose to hold close, no matter how much time passes. And maybe the biggest question of all is this: does someone out there need to hear from you before the sun goes down today?